episode 7 of my watercolor fundamentals series. And the topic of today's episode is mixing grays. I think it's an important one because to mix grays, we need to understand a little bit about color. Now, there are an awful lot of watercolors out there these days that one can purchase, and I do use in my palette what's called a convenience gray. So it's already made for me, therefore convenient. But it's not, I think, enough to just throw a convenience gray in your palette and just use it without understanding what it is. What if you run out and you need to mix some? Or, what really is gray is, I think, a really important question, because it's not always what you think. Sometimes, it's going to be a little bit of a blue gray, or it could be a slightly green gray. There's a great book by a lady, and I apologize if I say her name wrong, but it's Jean Dobie. And the book is called Making Color Sing. And in it, she references mouse color, a term that I believed she picked up from somewhere else. It's all these little small players in a painting, these grays that really make up a large part of a painting, especially in landscapes. And when I use birds, there's lots of grays in there. So it's a very important, I want to say color. Who knows? But it's very important to understand it and how to create it independent of just having a convenience gray. And there's a few ways to go about it. And I'm approaching this whole series from a very beginner's standpoint. So we're going to kind of go through a few ways that we can get a gray. If you've got a very basic set of watercolors, you probably have your primaries in that set, a yellow, a red, and a blue. So I kind of just drawn a small little color wheel here. This generally is what I'll draw when I'm talking about color. I don't pull out a big fancy color wheel. It's just too much information and you can get lost in it. I find it's much easier to just stick to the basics and a functional understanding of color. And once you have a functional understanding, it's a lot about using your eyes, because there's a lot of recipes out there. And often, I know for myself in the past, I thought I needed to have all these specific colors in order to get these specific results. But it's not true. The colors you have are probably good enough. Really, if you've got a set of primaries, you can mix almost anything. It's just going to take a little bit more work. And ultimately, that's kind of how I've, built my palette out, which I'm going to talk about building a palette in a later episode. That's not the purpose of today. So we're going to stick with, a very small subset of colors. We're going to stick with some primaries, and we're going to use primaries to mix a gray. And then we're going to use a complement pairing to mix a gray, and then I'm going to use a convenience gray and kind of show you how you could use something like that. So the basic idea, going back to this here, is we have our primaries, our yellows, reds, and blues. And the primaries are thus because nothing else mixes to make those, right? I can't take orange and green and get yellow. I can't take orange and violet and get red. I can't take green and violet and get blue. But I can take red and blue and get violet. I can't take blue and yellow and get green. And for red and yellow, I can use those to get orange. Now, in the center of a color wheel, this is where we end up in our, neutral territory, the grays, and in, really concentrated mixes towards blacks. And these come about from complements. A complement are colors, it's a color pairing from opposite sides of the wheel. So theoretically, orange and blue will neutralize in the middle to make gray. Red and green meet in the middle to make gray. And theoretically, yellows and violets should also neutralize to make gray, though I do find using those two to get gray is a little on the difficult side. If we're only working with primaries, we don't have an orange. I have a yellow, a red, and a blue. So how am I going to make gray? Well, you do it in a couple steps. You start with your yellow and your red, and you mix it to an orange, and then you add blue, because then you have your orange complement to blue, and then you neutralize that orange with the blue, and you should theoretically end up with gray. So we're gonna try that. I have in my palette here, I have a couple yellows, but I'm gonna stick with a more common yellow that's found in a lot of palettes. This is a Hansa yellow medium. Some of you may have lemon yellow or a Hansa yellow light or cad yellow light hue or something like that. But it's a pretty standard yellow. I'm going to use permanent alizarin crimson, again a fairly common hue in palettes. And then for a blue, I'm going to use ultramarine. I'm going to use these as my primaries: Hansa yellow medium, permanent alizarin crimson, and ultramarine. When I'm mixing multiple colors together, it's a really good idea to start with your lightest one, just to avoid as much cross-contamination of your paints as possible. I'm not using the plate today, I'm right into my palette. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of water in here because I'm not gonna make a huge painting of gray. So I guess just a little bit of water, and what I'm gonna do is grab some yellow, and I'm just gonna mix that in there. And what I'm after is an orange. So I will just go, and I need to be careful with the alizarin because it's quite strong. See what happens there? I grab just a tiny little bit, and it goes pretty quickly past where I want. So I'll just go back and pick up a little more yellow, mix that back in here. And what I'm looking for is an orange. So that's looking okay. So I'm just gonna clean my brush, get the excess moisture out, put a little bit of water over here, and then I'm going to grab some ultramarine, just like so. I could do this below, or I could do it in a separate well. Then all I'm gonna do is just come over here and grab this. One thing you might notice already is that when I put that blue in here, how dull that orange went, right? We get this neutralizing. So instead of a brighter orange, it starts to get duller as soon as I add the blue into it. So you can already see this idea occurring. So there, I mix some blue in here. Now here's why I said earlier, a functional understanding of the color wheel. It's all you need. Past that, you need to use your eyes. Because what's happening here, as I'm mixing these, I'm getting a neutral, but it's not completely neutral. It's got a slight hue to it. And that hue, it's a little bit green, okay? So we just go back to our functional understanding and we go, well, if it's slightly green, what's opposite green? Red. So if I put a little bit of red in here, I should be able to get rid of some of that green. So we just do a little balance. And again, I'm trying to be very gentle with the amount of red. I already went past the finish line once. So here, I got a little bit of red in there. And that seems to be getting rid of the green. But now it feels a little bit warm, maybe a touch too red. So I'm just gonna go back to my ultramarine, just a little bit at a time. I'm really just gently touching the tip of my brush in there. See, just a little bit of blue. It's also when you're painting and you're mixing your colors beforehand, right? Then you have them ready for when you paint. You don't want to be trying to do this kind of thing on the fly. So I'm just going little bit by little bit, and I'm just watching as this shifts. And there's a little bit more blue. And now I have a very nice gray that is a combination of my 3 primaries. And I can just brush that out here so that you can see it. And you can do that with any 3 primaries. You just need to watch what's happening in your wells, right? If you see it go a little bit green, then you know you need to use a little bit of red. If you see it a bit too orange, you know you need to add blue. Right? If you see it whichever way, you just need to watch and then think about what the complement is to what you're seeing, okay? So that's mixing a gray with your primaries. Now, just to kind of keep things nice and tidy, I'm just gonna clean this out. There we go. Now, we'll talk about mixing grays with complement pairings, okay? So less than 3 colors. And in my palette, I have one that I like to use quite a bit. And, you know, not for really any other reason other than I'm familiar with it, I like the results, and I know they'll work. So a little bit of water, and into that water, I'm adding burnt umber. Specifically, it's called transparent brown oxide, but it's similar in hue to burnt umber. And then I'm going to take some ultramarine, and I'm going to mix some ultramarine in there. And you can see it's still very warm, but the overall brightness of the color is starting to look duller because the blue is starting to neutralize it. And you can see it's even more so now. So we just go a little bit at a time, and we keep mixing until we get what we're after. It's still a little warm, but it is quite lovely. And you can make that choice too as you're mixing. Maybe you want a warmer gray, right? You just don't add as much blue. You really get to tune this to your tastes. Now, I live up in kind of the Pacific Northwest, and I find if I'm painting like the gray skies and stuff that are around here, this particular combination of pigments works really well for our overcast skies. There we go. So that's looking pretty nice there. So I'll go beside this one, and we'll brush this out. Drop a little bit more in here. So there's another gray. using a complement pairing. Now you can do this with other complements as well, right? You can use this with a green and a red pairing. You could use, if you had cobalt blue and like cadmium orange, those would work well together. The important thing is to know that they're complements, right? So this kind of transparent brown oxide is probably somewhere around here on the color wheel, so it's still kind of opposite of my blue, so they do neutralize pretty well. Most important thing is to experiment, really, with your paints and find out what works for you. And even more importantly, that when you're mixing them, you're not trying to rely on a recipe and go, well, that didn't work, right? It will work. You just need to watch and you need to pay attention and you need to see what's going on where you're mixing, see what color you're seeing, and then know to adjust it with a complement. Now, lastly, the convenience grays. Let me get a little bit of water down in here. I've used all sorts of ones in the past. I've used neutral tint is a really good one. Payne's gray is another really good neutral gray. Both of those, even though they're very neutral and they're very gray, they are a little cool, meaning they lean slightly blue to my eyes. But that can also depend on the paint maker too, right? Not all convenience colors are created equal because they're using combinations of pigments. It's not just a single pigment gray kind of thing. And this is a really good example of that. This is I think one of the more recent paints I've started using. It's called McCracken Black. I sort of expected it to, be a black, and I don't know, maybe I'm not using it right, but when I tested it out, I was just more enamored with it as a gray. So a little bit of water in this, and I'll paint some of this out. And you can see it's quite a lovely gray value. And if you see the way that I've mixed these, I should have put this one in the middle. But each of these is a valid gray. No problem with them. It really just kind of depends where you lean, right? This one feels a little bit warmer. I can see a bunch of the component colors. I see little bits of the ultramarine in here. It's really quite lovely. Similarly, this one as well. This is definitely a bit cooler, right? I pulled it a little bit more with the blue. I could have brought it back a bit with the transparent brown oxide / burnt umber, but I did kind of like that value. And then this McCracken Black, I like this one quite a bit. It seems very middle gray to me, right? So there's 3 grays, 3 ways. 1 mixed with the primaries, 1 mixed with a complement pairing, and then 1 which is just a convenience gray. Now, I know how to make these. I do really like this and I will use it in paintings, but I would say a greater percentage of the time I'm going with a convenience gray. One of the main reasons for that, I don't ever use it just like this, right? If I want to warm this up, I can just take this, add a little bit of, say, burnt umber to it. That was a bit too much, right? And then very quickly, I have a very gray brown, which can be used for a lot of things. This is a really color you'll find in birds quite regularly. But similarly, I can still take that color. This is what I find I do with the McCracken black quite a bit, is I'll have some of it. And then I usually take a little bit of ultramarine in it. And then I cool it down. I use this a lot. I will even put a little bit of violet into it as well. You can see here's the original. Here's something warmer with the transparent brown oxide in it. And then beside, I've taken this one and put a little bit of ultramarine into it just to cool it down. It shares some similar properties to this combination over here. So there we go. There's a little bit about mixing grays. And I hope that you learned a couple things and that this is of use to you. As always, thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. If you like the video, please consider subscribing. I have currently about 24 topics that I intend to cover over the next while. So if you subscribe, then you'll get notified when new ones get posted. I don't have a set schedule. I'm trying to get at least one out a week. So yeah, if you subscribe, you'll get a notification when it goes up. And if you're enjoying this, do feel free to comment. Let me know, like the video. And we'll talk to you again soon. Until then, paint on. Bye.